Hello, good morning. Can you hear me? Is this thing on? Great, thank you. Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Jessie Lazarus, and I'm the Vice President of Go-to-Market at Carmera, which has recently been acquired by Woven Planet. But more importantly, I have the great privilege of serving as a board member for the Center for an Urban Future. I'm really excited to welcome you this morning and to introduce this event to you. So if you're not familiar with us, the Center for an Urban Future is an independent think tank focused on building a more inclusive economy in New York and expanding economic opportunity for all New Yorkers. We've published a lot of work, and in recent months, many of our reports and events have focused on very concrete ideas for ways to advance and create a more equitable and inclusive economy in the city and the state. So we've written about the need to scale up the city's most effective tech training programs, shown why it's so important to extend the state's tuition assistance program to cover part-time CUNY students, and urge government to bolster their support for entrepreneurs in public housing. And finally, we've made the case for new programs that would help roughly 700,000 adults in the city who will have some credit from CUNY and college programs, don't actually have a degree, and reconnecting them to CUNY to finish their credential. I think it's clear, it's clear to Cuff, and it's certainly clear, I think, to many of you in this room that there are few institutions that are more important to creating this equitable economy in New York than the City University of New York. So CUNY is already among the top colleges in the US that are providing a pathway to the middle class. But with today's forum and a report that will come out in a few weeks related to this subject, we're going to dig into a very specific and relatively untapped opportunity. And that is one that CUNY is uniquely positioned to help expand this pathway into the middle class. That is the opportunity for CUNY to fully harness CUNY, as a springboard into tech careers. So we have a great discussion, and I will get out of the way so we can get things going. But before we do, I'd be remiss if we didn't give a very warm thank you to Amazon for making today's event possible. Also supporting, yes. They've done a few more things too. So we're also grateful to them for their support for the report related to today's event that'll come out soon. It's the report about harnessing CUNY as a springboard into tech careers, of course, and then also the important steps they've taken to cover tuition costs for hourly employees at 8 CUNY colleges. So with that, thank you for being here. Thank you to Amazon. Look forward to a great discussion. I'll turn it over to Jonathan Bowles, who's Cuff's executive director. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Jessie. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Bowles, Executive Director of the Center for an Urban Future. Have any of you been to a Center for an Urban Future event before? Wow. So I hope you agree with me that they're pretty good. And I say that only because one person is disproportionately responsible for really making our events really good, and that's Stephanie Aravallo. So I wanted to really thank Stephanie for all of her hard work. Thanks also to all of you for being here today, and to the 150 people or so that are tuning in on our live stream. And a big thank you to Amazon for their support. Like Jessie was saying, building a more equitable economy in New York won't be possible if we don't greatly expand access to the good jobs that are growing here. Now more than ever, that means tech jobs. The tech sector has accounted for a whopping 17% of the city's entire job growth since 2010. In just the past decade, the tech sector added 114,000 jobs here in New York City. To put that in perspective, during the same period, hospitals added just 4,000 jobs in New York City. The construction industry added 29,000. The securities industry, 17,000. Manufacturing jobs actually declined by 20,000 during this period. But while tech has become New York's most reliable source of new, well-paying jobs, too many New Yorkers are struggling to access them. Black and Hispanic New Yorkers make up 43% of the city's overall workforce, but hold just 21% of tech sector jobs in New York. Closing this tech opportunity gap needs to be a major policy priority in the months ahead, and CUNY will need to play a central role. While New York is home to several amazing nonprofit tech training organizations and programs, many of which are here today, CUNY uniquely has the capacity to help New Yorkers from underrepresented populations prepare for tech careers at scale. While the best tech training providers serve anywhere from a few dozen to a few hundred New Yorkers each year, CUNY graduates more than 9,000 students annually with STEM degrees and nearly 4,000 with technology degrees. Among all CUNY students enrolled in STEM programs, approximately half are Black or Hispanic, and roughly 71% of all CUNY students come from households earning less than $40,000 a year. In the next few weeks, like Jesse said, the Center for an Urban Future will be publishing a major new report shining a light on this opportunity, but also showing that New York still has a long way to go to fully harness CUNY's potential as a springboard into tech careers. Right now, for instance, while there are some notable exceptions, most tech companies in the city today employ a few, if any, CUNY grads. I'm really optimistic we can change this. And I'm excited that today's discussion will help identify what steps need to be taken by the city, by CUNY itself, and by tech employers in the city. Now let's get the discussion started. If we can just bring up our panelists, and also I'm going to turn it over to my terrific colleague, Eli Dvorkin, our editorial and policy director. Thank you.
You're welcome anywhere. You come right next to me if you want. That's it. Far side. It will just save the one chair on the end for the just.
Hi, yes, thank you.
Come on, Dad. Don't want to be lonely over on the end here. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. Good morning. My name is Eli Dvorkin. I'm the editorial and policy director at the Center for an Urban Future, and it's my great pleasure to moderate today's discussion. I'll just mention quickly up front, we will also be joined by Councilmember Eric Dinowitz, the chair of the Council's Higher Education Committee. He'll be arriving in about 30-40 minutes or so. Until then, we will get our conversation started. And I'd love to introduce our panelists as well. Also just mention to our audience that we would love to hear your questions as part of this event, and we will absolutely save time toward the end of today's discussion. So get your questions in mind. Feel free to write them down, and we'll make time for that in just a little bit. But first, let me begin by introducing our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We're joined, of course, by the Chancellor of the City University of New York, Felix Matos Rodriguez. The Chancellor was previously the president of Queens College, as well as Hostos Community College, and served as Puerto Rico's cabinet secretary of the Department of Family Services. He is the co-chair of the New York City Regional Economic Development Council and serves on the board of several nonprofit, civic, educational, and human services organizations. Chancellor, it's so great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Great, happy to be here, thank you.
Chancellor, we should have coordinated beforehand, because if I knew you weren't going to wear a tie, I might have left mine at home as well.
This is, I'm trying to relate to the tech sector people that tend to be, so I mean, this is my bad.
Thanks for dressing up.
Yes. Yeah, this is, baby steps.
One
baby
step at a
steps.
time. We're also joined this morning by Don Barber. A good introduction. Don is the co-founder of Creative Tech Week, the city's leading festival showcasing the intersection of creativity and technology. She founded CUNY Tech Meetup, a meetup for CUNY students to connect with leaders in the tech community, and is also a co-founder of New York Tech Meetup. As you may gather, Don likes to found things. That has, of course, been a central node for the city's tech community since, I would say, 2004. So going on 20 years of New York Tech Meetup, which is really amazing. Don, welcome. So great to have you with us. We're also joined this morning by Lindsey Siegel. Lindsey is the head of impact at Company Ventures, a New York City-based VC fund, which is working to build a more equitable and sustainable tech culture in New York. She leads the City Fellowship, collaborating with the New York City Employment and Training Coalition to support New York-based impact entrepreneurs, and previously served as the executive director of the Zahn Innovation Center at City College. Welcome, Lindsey. Great to have you with us. We're also joined this morning by Joe Siegel. Abby is the executive director of the Mayor's Office of Talent and Workforce Development, where she's leading the city's efforts to connect New Yorkers to quality jobs. Prior to this appointment, Abby was the founding CEO of Here to Here, based in the Bronx, an organization working to strengthen career pathways for young people in low-income neighborhoods, and previously was executive director of the Diamond Foundation as well. Abby, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're also joined this morning by Hashir Qureshi. Hashir is a media application architect at Amazon Web Services and a 2019 Cuny graduate. Great to have you with us, Hashir. Hashir is also a mentor at Amazon and actively mentors students from Cuny. Hashir, great to have you as well. And I'll introduce him, although he'll be here with us in just a few moments, but we will also be joined for this discussion by Jason Clark. Jason is the executive director of Tech NYC. More on that in a moment. But turning to the Chancellor, I'd love to start this conversation with you, sir. We know that there is a growing consensus in New York that we need to take bold new steps to help expand access to the parts of the economy where good jobs are growing. And we know that that means especially investing in institutions that can help to achieve this. But help us understand, why is Cuny so critical in achieving that vision, realizing that opportunity now and in the future?
Well, thank you, and great to be with all of you this morning, and thank you to Jonathan and the entire team at the Center for the Urban Futures for this event and for the great work that you do, indispensable for our city, and always a great partner in highlighting some of the good things we do and also giving us homework on things that we need to continue to do better. So thank you for that. And want to also give a shout out to President Robin Garrell, because we are in her school, the Graduate Center. Thank you for allowing us to be here, Robin, and for being a great hostess. I could just roll back some of the intro comments that Jonathan made about Cuny, right, to be able to answer the question. And I think that the short answer is that there's not really a way to do it at scale with quality if it's not through Cuny, right? Which means two things: is responsibility on our end to be able to be as current and as dynamic in terms of programming, curriculum, partnerships, all those things. And I think that there's a clear indication that we'll be moving in the right trajectory on that front, and learning about some things that would be scalable and would allow us to meet that those goals. That's one end. The other end is that if the sector is serious about expanding, reaching to talent that is diverse, right, in socioeconomic conditions, in race and ethnicity, the only way that's going to happen is through Cuny. I mean, that's just, there's no other answer there, right? So you have to work with us in making sure that we are responsive, because it's really where those New Yorkers go to get their education, right? I mean, this is where the talent base is in our campuses. So we are committed to continue to work in this direction. We have created the Division of Career and Industry Partnerships. Lauren Anderson is leading that effort. She's sitting there in the second row, because, and actually she came to us after being a lead in one of the programs, the Cuny 2X and the Tech Talent Pipeline programs that we've seen have been effective, right? And she brings that expertise to the work that we're doing. And now we need to find ways to scale that up, to continue working with our partners, getting that feedback about what works and what are the things our students need to know to be able to be ready to take those opportunities. But then also take responsibility for taking those students in and creating pathways for them to be able to connect with those jobs.
Thanks, Chancellor. And I think, to your right is one of those students you're talking about, former students, a City Tech graduate. Hashir, I wanted to ask you on this part of the conversation, thinking about, you've experienced this journey firsthand. You're working now at AWS, having started your journey at City Tech. What would you say are CUNY students' greatest strengths when you make the case to other folks in the tech sector that they should be looking to CUNY? And you heard from Jonathan before, not all are just yet. What do you say to them? Why should they be looking to CUNY to recruit their future workforce?
Are you able to hear me correctly? Okay. Yeah, so at first hand, one thing that I have seen and I have noticed and I've been a part of, right, in CUNY is every classroom has the most diverse group of students and people there, right? And really what I mean by that is that each person has their own ideas, has their own struggles, right? And all these diverse backgrounds, they really give these students power to really reach their goals, right? Everyone sitting in that classroom has their struggles, has their backgrounds, right? One person could be working 5 jobs in a week, right, and still trying to go to school to make it. You know, someone could right now be homeless and still be going to school and still trying to even get an apartment, right, at the same time, and trying to afford to even live, right? Those are the types of backgrounds that we have in these classrooms. And I think the tenacity of these students that comes from this background is really the reason why employers should be looking at CUNY, right? So the person that was homeless, for example, was me. I was homeless and I was working 2 jobs, and still going from that to trying to climb to one day afford a home, right? That is what you will get in CUNY. I've seen many different people just in my close network of friends and peers that are in the same position as me, still trying, and some that have made it just like me, right? So I think that, to answer your question, yeah, that is the main reason, is the diversity and the motivation and tenacity that you find in CUNY students.
Thanks, Hashir. Jason, I want to bring you on this, and let me just also introduce you very, very briefly. It's so great to have you with us. But Jason Clark is the executive director of Tech NYC. Jason previously was a partner at Hamilton Clark, an assistant attorney general for New York. It's the founder of Dream Chasers, which helps underrepresented students attend New York City specialized high schools, and the legal director of Good Call NYC, a startup which connects arrested New Yorkers with a free attorney. Jason, it's great to have you with us.
Great, it's great to be here. And thank you. This is actually my second event for this morning, but actually this works out well because we had an opportunity to speak a little bit with Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. And we want to make sure that as we're starting to have this conversation, you know, at each and every touch point we have, we're telling folks about the importance of growing the tech sector, but also doing so in a way that is inclusive of, you know, the CUNY ecosystem.
I really appreciate that, Jason. Let me ask you a little bit then about kind of the challenges to achieving that. And I think from even your brief biography, folks can see not only have you been thinking about the tech sector and the city's innovation and startup communities, but also really thinking a lot about how to make sure that more New Yorkers have access to the good jobs in the economy that are being created today. You know, I think one of the challenges here is understanding that, you know, even as the sector reports that talent is the #1 reason why companies start and grow here, that not all companies are really seeing CUNY as part of how they bring talent in. And you know, a survey that Tech NYC and Accenture conducted with industry leaders found that only about 24% of tech executives are considering CUNY to meet their hiring needs. Now, I think for many folks in the room, that may sound like an encouraging figure. I bet you that is significantly higher than it would have been 10 or 20 years ago. But that also suggests how far a distance there is yet to travel to get that number far, far higher, to maybe match some of the peer institutions here in New York City. What's needed to help convince more tech companies that they should be recruiting from CUNY? And what could CUNY potentially do to help facilitate stronger relationships with folks in the tech sector today?
Yeah, great. And I'm glad you asked that question. Well, I think the first answer is everybody that's here. You know, each and every one of you is the way that we make sure that folks know that they can be able to get their talent. You could be able to have folks from CUNY who are in these positions. You know, at Tech NYC, one of the things that we recently did is, you know, we just created a jobs board. And with that, we just even aggravated all the different career services pages of all our members. And just today, you know, you can look on our page and there are over 10,500 job opportunities just opening, right? And through the conversations I've had with our members, you know, the first thing that everyone is always talking about, like, what is the most important thing to you? It says the talent pipeline, making sure there are folks who can be able to fill the job opportunities that they have. So I think that part of it is just making sure that people know that there is a robust, dynamic pipeline of tech talent that's here. So having conversations like this, I think Cuss Report talking about this, given that it's such a large, member of the industry that people respect, they're going to see this and then they're going to start to think about ways that they can get involved. I'd also like to see ways that we can be able to make it easier for employers to be able to connect with CUNY. I know one of the challenges sometimes is that, there's CUNY, there are so many terrific institutions that are part of it, but especially as your employer, especially for the ones that aren't the Google or Amazon or what have you, but are in some of those, mid-stage areas, being able to have a one point of contact to make sure that, they can be able to speak with them and say, these are the opportunities that we have. We'd like to figure out ways that we can be able to connect. So figuring out ways that we can kind of centralize that hub. Another thing I would mention also has to do with internships. I mean, I think internships is so critical in a lot of ways, right? Because the thing is, I just think about my career path. I think about a lot of my colleagues. Our first jobs came from places where we interned before. And a lot of times we also realize the places that we didn't want to go from where we interned before too, right? So these things are important for the employee or the potential employee as well as the employer. And I think that we have to figure out ways that we could create a much more robust system of interning and paid internships, right? So that folks can be able to have an opportunity to be able to feel, be able to sit in some of these seats. And, the last thing I'll say on that point is that, growing up, I have a younger sister. She's 2 years younger. And she would always say how, she was so nervous about getting into college. But as soon as she saw me get into college, she didn't worry about it anymore. Because you're like, if he could do it, I could definitely do it, right? But I think there's some real value and real truth there, right? When you've been able to sit in these seats and sit with other folks, from different schools and realize that there's nothing that makes them different than you. And at the same time, for the employers to be able to see that, I think that's where we start to, one, eliminate those limiting beliefs that we sometimes have in ourselves, and two, make sure that the employers are there, see that this can be a real solution for the tech challenges that they're dealing with.
Thanks, Jason. I mean, Lindsey, Don, I'd love to bring you both in on this. I know, not least of which because you both have such deep experience in the tech sector. But Lindsey, in your case, also really both of you having deep experience with CUNY as well. And Lindsey, in your case, actually running an internship program that's giving CUNY students the kind of opportunities that Jason and Hashir are both talking about. Maybe Lindsey, I could start with you, thinking a little bit about what does it take, and folks in this room may not be familiar with the program that you're running. What does it take to build an internship program that actually successfully places CUNY students in tech startups? As our research has shown, that's rarely the case today without some kind of intermediary like yours helping to connect those dots. But to help us understand what's the challenge there and what's working about your program that potentially we could all learn from to be able to expand those kinds of opportunities. I should say, just to set the table for folks in the room, these days, and these numbers are from a CUNY survey that's now a few years old, but only about 10% of CUNY students report having a paid internship in their CUNY college careers. Maybe 21% in total report having an internship. And by comparison at Columbia College, at Columbia University, it's about 98, 99%. So you can see again, the challenge, the scale of the challenge, but you're doing something about this. Your program is actually giving CUNY students those opportunities to embed in a tech workplace. How is that working? And what should we know if we want to make that model replicable and grow?
I come to this with such humility being on the stage with you all. We are a venture capital firm based in Midtown. We take between 30 and 40 CUNY interns working at our startup. So out of the scale of CUNY, it's tiny, but it is significant for each one of those students. So I'm still very proud of what we've been able to accomplish. The process of the program is we have, as most venture firms do, we have a portfolio of companies and a whole network of startups that are in our community. We collect from them the opportunities to employ students. Then we work with our partners at CUNY to help find the students who are interested in the summer internships, and then create the matchmaking in order for those employers to find the students. That sounds simple, but it's very hard. There's a few challenges. One, students must be paid. like no unpaid internships. That is just not fair. If you are like, if you are looking at creating a pathway for students to enter into tech careers, you can't make them choose between quality opportunities that will build their resume versus, you know, their job that they need, right, in order to pay rent and live. So paid internships is core to that. We have been really fortunate this year to work with partners at the Blackstone Foundation. And so through their program with Cuny that is supporting student entrepreneurial thinking and the entrepreneurial mindset, they have been willing to fund the students to work at our startups. So we have already like a triangulated relationship. We work with our startups, we then work with Cuny, and then we all have this funder who's enabling those startups who don't have the budget or the capacity to pay to actually pay the students for their time. So then the other components of this are, one, getting the message out to all the Cuny campuses. And this is where Lauren and her team are essential for us to have a point of contact within Cuny Central, but be able to reach all the campuses. The challenge that comes with that is when you get hundreds of students applying for a handful of positions, there needs to be a really robust vetting process. Because again, I work with startups that are so under pressure that they can't sift through hundreds and hundreds of resumes in order to find a summer intern. So we rely on some of the partners that are really exceptional teams within the Cuny system, like the Cuny Tech Prep folks, Cuny 2X, to help be kind of part of that vetting process. But we need support from Cuny in order to have vetted candidates who are ready and going to perform well in their internship. And then the final part of it is, I think one of the strongest things that we can offer is not just that resume building opportunity, but a connectivity into an ecosystem that is locked shut for Cuny, sadly, right? Like if you come into Cuny and you are first in your family to pursue a college degree, you're not necessarily coming from a well-networked group of people who are like, let me show you what your resume needs to look like. Let's practice your technical interview. Let me introduce you to my uncle, right? So what we have to offer as one small piece of the tech ecosystem is our ecosystem. We match each student with a mentor from within our startup community to be that student's advocate, help them over the course of their internship, but also just we give them a curriculum and try to help them to open doors for the students. So those are the core components. Again, though, it's 30 to 40 students. I think there is an opportunity for every venture firm to be trying to find this way of solving this challenge. I think it also is an opportunity for every funder to come in and look at this as a great on-ramp for students to get paid internships to work at startups where they see what this tech universe is about.
That's great, Lindsey.
And I'll
Go
just
ahead, please,
actually very quickly say that if every venture firm brought in 30 to 40 CUNY students, then I think that, we'd be able to solve this problem. So, thank you.
Yep, that's the scale.
No, I think the scale of that is really important to understand. And when we're talking about the needs among CUNY students for those sorts of internships and what they're up against, our research also has found that nationally there's about 5 applicants for every 1 computer science internship in the country. In New York City, the ratio is about 175 to 1. So the competition is fierce. I think arguably the supply also isn't where it needs to be. It is both, but to that point, every venture firm taking on even 3 or 4 interns, let alone 30 to 40, could make a big difference. But Don, let's talk a little bit about, again, where some of those potential barriers might be. And I know from your experience, part of it, and Jason mentioned this before, 25 CUNY colleges, a lot of employers that we interviewed told us, we really struggle to figure out, is there a right door? Or if we find a door for one college, it's not a door for all. I know that you've gotten through some of those challenges by starting CUNY Tech Meetup, but also that's been trouble to keep it going. I'd love to get your perspective, having worked so closely with so many startups over the years, but also made the case personally for CUNY. What are those pain points for those startups when they or other tech companies in connecting with CUNY? Where would you like to see more progress to help to close some of those gaps?
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you, Eli and Jonathan. You know, I feel like Lindsay, very honored to be on this panel. Yeah, you know, I think Jason and Lindsay have said a lot of the things I think are important. I think the three-pronged approach, right? It's, you know, CUNY, it's our tech community on the venture as well as on the company side, and it's our city, right? That support, I think, is really important. So I think it's really important to work together. I think convenings like this, Jason does convenings as well with Tech NYC. And I think we have to continue those conversations. So it's like great that we're on the panel here. We need to meet with the chancellor like after this and say, like, let's really drill down and see what we can do here. I think people putting in the work, Lindsay puts in the work. That's a lot of work.
Not alone, I have a team. Yay, Mia Manitan, who may be in this room. It's all her.
You know, I think on our tech community side, we need more people like that willing to do the work. I think the internship apprenticeship approach is hugely important. So I say whether you're someone who's directing a program like Lindsay is the director, but even technologists, even if you're just a manager, whatever, if you're willing to just mentor in any way for any length of time a CUNY student, I cannot tell you in general how appreciative they are to be accepted into our tech community and how important that is for us to do that. So I think, you know, easier said than done. CUNY Tech Meetup, I really started, quite frankly, because I proposed an apprenticeship program where CUNY students would get paid. The city, you know, would be on board. CUNY Central was on board. I put out a budget. I had a whole thing. Oh, sorry. And, you know, and it just didn't fly. It just was taking too long. So I said, okay, well, here's something I know. I know how to start meetups. I started New York Tech Meetup. Let's do a version of New York Tech Meetup for just CUNY Tech Meetup. And one of the reasons I did it was because I was working just with CUNY Central. So it's like, I don't work at CUNY personally, but you guys put the word out in general to the CUNY students. You know, I can talk to the different colleges individually. So that was kind of my workaround in a sense. You know, I do think though, and Lindsay touched on this, communication is key. I'm not sure CUNY's always so great with working with the outside in terms of communicating with all your internal schools and then translating that for us on the tech community side. So I think we need some work there. But the, you know, public-private CUNY city partnership, I think it's easy to talk about it, and we really have to all be committed to doing the work around it.
Thanks, Don. I mean, on the subject of those, you know, committed to doing the work to bring those different stakeholders together. I mean, Abby, I got to bring you in on this, and I think you've done this work prior to your current role. You've made the case directly to employers for why they should be part of building a talent pipeline and not just consuming talent. I know that's not an easy case to make. I'd love to just have kind of a two-part question. One is really, in your experience, what's been most effective in making the case to employers, especially those in tech, that they should see themselves as partners in developing their future workforces, and what actually works to make that case? And obviously, related to that, what role can government play, if any, in actually helping to accelerate that kind of work?
Thank you, and wonderful to be here, and great to see so many people in the audience who've been working tirelessly to do this work. And I too am humbled to be here. So I think if there were an easier answer, we wouldn't all be up here on stage saying there's one thing, there's no one silver bullet. But one thing that I've learned is, you know, we have a system today that's perfectly designed for the outcomes we have. And so that should make us all pause, because I think we heard from Jonathan today, we heard from Philo, we heard from Eli, all of us, we're not happy with those outcomes. So that means that we really need to look at what are the systems that are driving them and what is the system change that needs to have happened. So when Dawn says that she's wanted to do apprenticeship but couldn't figure out how to do that, that makes my heart sink, right? Because we know apprenticeship is one of the ways, and this is apprenticeship with lowercase a as well as capital A, that really does change systems. So when I think about it, it really needs to be one, that employers, government, and CUNY, as well as other higher ed institutions or training organizations, we need to be very clear that we have shared goals, what those shared goals are, and that we're committed to those shared goals. And so that is, I think we've heard some of the ingredients in that today, where the tech sector needs talent, and the tech sector needs diverse talent. And CUNY has diverse talent, and CUNY has diverse talent that needs jobs and opportunity. And the city of New York will only benefit the more that we make sure CUNY students and New York City residents are in those tech jobs, because they are good jobs. So that seems pretty aligned. So what does that mean in terms of how does that translate into commitments? What does that look like? And then we really need to think about, how do we align our resources and our incentives? So how do we make sure there's incentives in place so we actually achieve those shared goals? So we need to look at that in terms of when we're giving out money, when we're thinking about who we're hiring for faculty and leading colleges, when we're thinking about our hiring processes in our companies. So for many years, as a lot of you know, I was in affordable housing. There was always this conversation when you had a mixed income building. Would you have one door as an entrance, or would you have two doors? Think about that. Think about having two doors. So if you're a company, and if you have one main door for how you access talent, and then other doors, what's that message sending? Both to the people you're having come into particular doors, as well as the people who are already there, as well as the city as a whole. So you really have to look at the front door and make sure that is welcoming to everybody. And if it's not, really ask yourself what needs to be different. And then last, it can't be just ad hoc. We have to create formal structures that concretize this change. And we're starting to see some of that. Last Monday, my Monday mornings are now devoted to panels, I think, and these conversations. So last Monday, there was a great announcement by the New York Jobs CEO Council, and I see Karen here, and the DOE and CUNY and the city, very much committed to looking at how we make sure New York City talent is well prepared for the growing jobs, particularly tech jobs in the city. They're starting to see change. There's an intermediate organization set up to really help make sure they're hiring from CUNY. And that happens at the scale of, big companies, and then smaller companies having intermediaries like Lindsey. So we need those formal structures in place, and we need commitments to fund those formal structures. Otherwise, what happens, and we all know this well, is we rely on informal networks. And we all know what informal networks result in. They result in a lot more inequity. So that's what I would say. We really have to get to the table and create those. And that's what I hope to do in this role that I'm now in. Thank you.
Thanks, Abby. And let's talk maybe a little bit about some of those incentives and things that government can be doing here. And Chance, I want to bring you back in on this. We know that there's been some really tremendous results from the CUNY 2X Tech initiative. For folks in the room who may not be familiar, the goal here was to double the number of CUNY students earning technology degrees, and you've succeeded in that,
Yep.
which is a tremendous achievement.
Even in the context of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think
Right?
anybody anticipated, launching
Yep.
a 4-year program where 2 of those years, 2+ would be in the middle of a global pandemic. At the same time, we can also see the benefits of specific initiatives like what's been raised today. For instance, the Tech Talent Pipeline's residency internship program. Students that participate in that program are more than 3 times as likely to land a full-time job after completing the program. I mean, that's a tremendous outcome. But the challenge perhaps there is that only about 750 students have been able to be served by that program over the past 5 years. We have other terrific programs at CUNY where the outcomes are good. The CUNY Tech Prep program, about 75% of those participants land a job or internship within 5 months of completing the program. But the capacity is about 170 students a year. And these are just a couple of programs that you have at CUNY. I think my question here is, one, which of these programs, or perhaps there's others that I haven't mentioned, feel to you like the most essential levers for helping to expand this work? And I mean, not just helping more students earn technology credentials, but really succeed in technology careers. And where would you like to see new investment, or how would you see government playing a new or enhanced role in supporting or catalyzing some of this work to help expand the impact?
Well, I think the short answer is that I like to see all of those things grow, right? They began as pilot projects, seed money, And now we have evidence that they've been successful. And we've also learned in that journey about other parts of our pipeline, right, that need to be improved. One question there clearly is additional resources. And I think the message about those resources on the philanthropic side and on the government side are getting out there, right? If in another panel on Thursday morning, I'll be at APNI, right? And we might be sharing some news about things that will be very of the delight of this audience, right? In terms of projects that are scaling up. And, but you know, we had, when the mayor supported our career launch, right, which is 2,000 paid internships, prioritizing community college students, right? Because we talk about all this, you know, prejudice has been a word that has not been used, right? But it's underlying some of these things, right? We also have that for the students in that sector, which is 40% of the students in the system. So we prioritize that. One of the main tracks in that career launch was tech sector, connecting in many cases with smaller companies that don't have the robust training program. So clearly we have a major that is a CUNY grad, gets it, and is committed to helping us in that track. We got additional money on the state budget for paid internships, right? And for additional work there. In both our lobbying efforts, I've made the point that increase in internships, that increase in students being connected to opportunities, to working with intermediaries, to all that requires two things minimally, right? Some staffing and people, and because we're probably never going to have all the people we need to better leverage also technology for some of that matchmaking and some of those things that can be done. On our end, our new provost comes from Georgia State. They've been national leaders in using technology on the advising and some of those things to help our students. So I've charged her to say, let's figure out how much of these things we can push the technology side on our end.
You're talking about your technology systems within CUNY to
For the students,
better-
about advising and orientation and all those things that we know that some of those things, I mean, we love to have people there and engage, but we also know that students can use technology for pathways to match with different things. We want to maximize what we can do on that front.
We've got technologists in our New York tech community who might be interested in
Of
helping
course,
you.
yes, absolutely. But we need to find the funding and the system that works for us. And then also you need staffing at the central office. If you think about it, the 5-6 years ago, there was really nothing at Central that was looking at these things, right? And so in 5-6 years, we've developed an entire division which is dedicated to do the design of work, which reports to the chancellor, right? The way that you signal that it is important. We are creating this office that will be that entry point, right, for the engagement. The widgets are still done on the campuses, right? So we also need to make sure that we invest in that infrastructure on the campuses too, right? Because even if you're really good centrally at convening people, you're going to have to be making those referrals, and that's where the students need to be ready. So I've made the case again, to the private sector when we go fundraising and to the state and the city, that an investment also in, what can be loosely called our career services and advising on the campuses that are the places where these connections are made also needs to be more robust. Those are places where traditionally the system had not invested. I can tell you that having served as president of 2 campuses, right? A lot of unevenness. That's why we have elevated that as something that requires importance. And it's actually also, when we talk about centralization, those were 2 areas that were the most amorphous in way they see in our structure, advising and career services, right? So we are revamping all that in our Office of Career Industry Partnerships to do that. Anybody who has heard me knows that when I die, and this is the metaphor that I said, there's going to be a tombstone that says Felix Matos Rodriguez, patron saint of CUNY paid internships, right? Because it is money in the pockets of our students. We talk about some of the things that get them not to graduate, food insecurity, transportation, housing. That is concretely money in their pockets. When you think about what we, for example, charge for tuition, right? I don't know how much your interns are paid each semester.
About $5,000.
So that is 1 year of tuition in our community college, right? And almost 1 year of tuition in a 4-year college. So that is a form of financial aid. For the student who's paying out of pocket, that money goes to pay for tuition, right? And other things. For the students who are on financial aid, that's the money for food, transportation, and housing. So the paid
But
internship.
you know, it also puts them on the level of students who can do the free internship at the cool company or whatever, because they can afford that. So it puts the, and that's really important for CUNY students.
Yes, but I'm pushing paid, right? Because we need those, right? And after I do the paid one, they can go to all the other ones where they can have the opportunity. But my point is that if you think from a student perspective, the paid internship not only has all the things that we talked about the networking, the introduction, all the social capital, right? But it is concretely a very good way to support our students that come, many of them from households that make less than $30,000 a year. So the paid internships is something that we are pushing on all fronts. The model that we're using, and the engaging faculty, it's critical here, right? I mean, there's some of the mentors in the Teacher in Residence Corps, right? We need to have that connectivity to be able to have that industry talent come teach and participate. It is also a great way for the faculty to create networks on their own, to be able to create those linkages with our students. Sometimes we get, it gets complicated because then the sector steal some of the time that we have on the campuses, right? Because they pay more than we do, and that's a real issue in this economy. So I think that we are set to really be able to scale up. One of the things that needs to be put on the table here, and I was having a conversation with someone who shall remain nameless, and you hire some people from something tech, I'm not going to say name, right? And do they work all the time? I said, no, I mean, no, sometimes they're prepared, but they're very, have a sense of entitlement, and they don't work out and whatever. And I said, and you never cease to recruit and go there because one of those two people didn't make it, right? Then when it comes to CUNY, right? If a program doesn't work, working with CUNY, it's a problem, right? And but when you have problems when dealing with all the other schools, nobody raises that. Nobody shuts that pipeline, right? So I think also something that needs to be said here is that if we're going to be committed here, some of the double standards need to be wiped out. And I mean, we obviously need to send students who are ready, prepared, and ready to succeed. They're there, right? But also, the sector needs to be more welcoming, which I think is a theme here. One last thing that I'll say, before the pandemic, met with a group, NYC Tech sort of put together a group of leaders in industry. This is what I was beginning as chancellor, now 3 years. It was the only sector meeting that I went with industry where almost nobody had a CUNY degree. I mean, to the point about any other space that I went, finance, law, you name the sector, people there had some CUNY degree. That was 3 years ago. In that sector, nothing. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Thank you, Chancellor. Yeah, Abby, go ahead.
Can I just pick up on something the chancellor said? I think it's really this what you're referring to, the double standard. It's really a question of risk. So we have to de-risk it for people in the tech sector and the hiring managers, as well as the HR departments, for hiring from CUNY. They can go and hire from Carnegie Mellon or Stanford or you name it. And if that candidate doesn't work out, it's like, oh, well, it's not my fault. But if they take the perceived risk of hiring from CUNY, then it's on them. And so that's where I think that you need to have sort of the top level leadership and have these call to actions at these at companies that we've seen some outside the tech sector saying, we're committed to hiring CUNY students. And I want to know why you're not hiring CUNY students, because unless we de-risk it, and this gets to your early question, we're going to continue to have that behavioral, because it's just, why would I take the risk? And frankly, particularly given what you said, Phalo, that there aren't CUNY graduates there already, people go to where they know. So they go to their alma maters, they go to their networks. So unless, again, we create formal structures like the programs you've created, or at a scale where we're really thinking about not just paid internships, but very much apprenticeships, and really structuring CUNY programs around occupations that are critical for the tech sector, and making sure that we have applied or professional degrees that get there. In other places where that do this well, there are professional degrees where at least 25% of the learning that is credited to the degree happens in the workplace. And CUNY is uniquely positioned to actually be that intermediary, to do that at scale around all the occupations that drive the tech sector, or frankly drive New York City overall. And I know there's some work going on to begin to do that, but that also makes it much more efficient for the students and the employers, because the students are already have those relationships, and they're getting credit for their work that they're getting paid for. So therefore they get to their degree faster.
Thanks, Abby. And I wanted to come back to both the point about how government can help to accelerate those sorts of work-based learning opportunities, and also, Chancellor, to your point about faculty, I wanted to ask a little bit more about that too. But Asher, I wanted to bring you back in again on this point around career services, access to the kind of experiences that are really so critical for finding success after graduation. And as a City Tech graduate, I think you know firsthand how challenging that can be. Our data shows that at City Tech, there are about 3 or 4 career counselors for about 17,000 students. So that's a pretty heavy load. Were you able to benefit from that at City Tech? Did you have challenges navigating the tech career pathways while you were an undergrad? What's the experience like for your average, City Tech student, for instance? Help us understand the challenges there.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna try not to make this a rant, because we are very passionate about career services at CUNY as students, but I'm not gonna go there. So yeah, of course, as every student at CUNY, you are basically sent an email about, hey, you are about to graduate soon, right? So I think a year and a half, maybe that has changed, but somewhere down the line, you get an email and you're contacted to go speak to a counselor about what's happening in the future, right? And really, I'm not gonna call names or blame anybody, but I think the real problem is the pipeline and the way it's set up, right? I think it's very outdated. So really those conversations with the counselors just turn into, we need to get you an internship to make you graduate, right? It's not really about, hey, what is your passion, right? You have a year left. At this point, you have to enter the workforce, right? You have to enter your tech sector. I'm gonna kind of focus it on the tech sector here. You have to enter there. So what are you doing to get there, right? What can we do together in this year and a half that we have to really get you into that door of the tech sector, right? And then obviously from there, you can take it, you could take it onto yourself afterwards once you're in. But no, most of my peers, most of my colleagues even, they got internships. Some of them were not even in tech. It was working at a desk job, at any kind of startup or a company, or even at the college, right? Just to get the internship credit, right? So as I was saying earlier, a lot of CUNY students, most of them are working multiple jobs trying to basically survive, right? That's what we do. And we don't have time to really get projects or internship experience that a lot of these companies are looking for, right? And so I personally had to do that on my own. I had to reach out to professors, to amazing professors in different departments even, to try to get some sort of a technical project, right? Try to work on projects and do those things and learn on my own, right? Because I obviously wanted to make it, right? I had that drive saying, I'm not gonna just stay there. I saw other peers who were graduating, go into that pipeline of just getting that internship credit and just trying to get into there, and it wasn't working for them, right? So I said, I don't want to do that. Something needs to change. And I didn't have the power as a CUNY student to make that change, which is another problem. I feel like those voices are not really being heard. So I said, okay, well, I have to make that change from myself, right? For myself. So I had to go outside. I had to look for these projects, right? Some of them were paid, a lot of them were not paid. But I said, ultimately, that's okay because I am getting the experience that I need to get these jobs that I want, right? And it panned out. It panned out really well. But of course, I see that huge hole that we have, right, in these career services. And I try to teach other students. I've been mentoring ever since college. I try to help them and make them realize, hey, you have time, right? Do not waste that time and rely on this pipeline, on these pipelines. These do need to change, and we have to come together to make that change. But you have to worry about your future, right? So you have to work on these avenues rather than trusting this pipeline. So those are really the challenges that I faced.
Thanks, Ashir. That's really helpful. I think at this point, I'd love to bring up our council member in the audience, Councilmember Eric Dinowitz, if you want to come join us on the stage. We're so grateful that you can make time to join us today. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Councilmember Dinowitz, who represents the Bronx, District 11, and on the New York City Council, and serves as the chair of the Committee on Higher Education. And some may not know that the council member also received his master's degree in special education from Hunter College, so is a CUNY graduate himself, and spent 13 years as a special education teacher before entering public service. So welcome, council member. Great to have you with us. So I think this marks the moment when we'd love to start to move in the direction of some of the solutions, on this panel. And I'd love to start with you talking a little bit about how you see the council's role in all of this. As the chair of the Higher Education Committee, but also as a CUNY graduate, as an educator, you know firsthand the power of education to help expand economic opportunity in the city. So let me start by just asking you what role you see CUNY playing, not just in general, but specifically when it comes to expanding access to these parts of the economy that are growing, that are adding so many well-paying jobs in the tech sector. And most importantly, what role can the city council play in, in boosting CUNY's efforts? We can certainly talk budget, but it could be policy issues, of any kind. But helping more New Yorkers launch into technology careers through your platform of the council.
Hello. Is this microphone on for just the Zoom people? Is that what this is?
Both, I think, the audience in the house and tuning in online as well.
Okay, cool. Well, that was a very long question. I don't know. I'm glad to be here. It really is an honor to help even out the tie to no tie ratio. And I'm looking out, there's one other guy with a tie, and especially here with the patron saint of paid internships. So as was mentioned, I taught for over 13 years as a special education teacher in New York City, and with my master's degree from CUNY, from Hunter, and my undergrad from SUNY. So I'm a public school kid, K through grad. So I'm really pleased with the education I got. I'll say that. Good job. But of all the things that I've heard, so I've been here since the beginning of the panel. Hashir, I got to say that your responses, your answers really spoke to me most because they reminded me most of my students. And one of the things that I'm trying to do in the council, one of the things we do is we hold hearings, for example. And I am trying, at least in those hearings, to and in, let's say the education committee and in all these other committees to recognize that our education system is very siloed. We talk about, excuse me, the 3K and pre-K program, cool. And then elementary school, boom, middle school, then high school, then college. And the truth is it's all a continuum, and including career. And it should really be talking to this question of, what do we want our students to do and what do we want them to be? And I think you kind of highlighted it well, which our system is working perfectly for the outcomes which it produces, which in my view, seeing it in the classroom, having been through the public school system, aren't exactly the outcomes that are beneficial to our students and to our city. And I think fundamentally we need to be asking, what do our students need to do well by themselves, for their families, and importantly and uniquely for CUNY, the responsibility is for the city of New York. And even outside on the window here, I think I read on the way in, for the public good. And that is a unique responsibility of CUNY for the public good. So recognizing our education system, answering that question, I think we're, you know, as the chancellor always mentions, paid internships is a huge component of that, right? We want to be developing a workforce that meets the needs of the city. And I think this conference, this panel is especially important to that, because we have a growing tech sector. New York City, we want New York City to be a tech center, a hub of the tech industry. And CUNY has that responsibility in order to provide for that. There are a lot of questions, a lot of issues that were raised here. And one of the things I want to point out for any of the private companies who are here today, we've spoken about paid internships. It's been mentioned a lot. And yes, there's considering that if 71% of the students come from families making $40,000 or less per year, and I've seen this time and again in my career as a high school teacher in the Bronx especially, that if I'm a student and I have to choose between an unpaid internship or even an internship that pays in a field that I want to do and supporting my family, many of my students have to support their family. So they choose the job in wherever, you know, every job is, you know, has dignity and everything, but it may not speak to the career they want. So even from high school, they're already in the experience field, they're already behind. But I put experience in quotation marks because I think it's vital that our private companies, bless you, look at more than what's on a resume and what's on a transcript. And this is what I'm talking about with the conversation is every city agent that comes before me, I feel the need to highlight to them that the answers don't always exist on a spreadsheet. So if I'm comparing two students, one with a, you know, I don't know, a 95 average and one with a 90 average, typically a private company would say, yeah, I want that kid with a 95 average. They did better in school. But my experience, and I think you spoke about your experiences very beautifully earlier, is many of the times my students who had the 90s, what were they doing? Well, they were probably also, in many cases, leaving school early to be the surrogate parent for their little siblings because their single parent was at work and couldn't pick up their little sibling. So with that one challenge alone, that student was performing really well given that other challenge. Or those students who have to work to supplement their parents' income and were also getting 90s in school. And they didn't have the luxury of having a job, an unpaid internship rather. They had to have a job to supplement their parents' income. Or, you know, again, throughout my career, I've seen teenage parents who have stayed in high school and succeeded to an incredible degree. I'm a dad with a wife or two parents, and we were both working when we had the kids. It's not easy. Any parent out here knows it's not easy. So imagine being a teenage parent and working to be a, you know, a good mom, a good dad to your kid, and also doing high school, which is tough enough. So I think our you know, really elevating that conversation about, you know, the qualities of the students we have that exist outside of the GPA, outside of the numbers that we see on a resume, is part of what I want to do in the city council, and part of what we all need to do, you know, especially our private companies need to do, you know, in especially the city of New York. And you kind of answered the budget question. More money is good.
Well, I'd love to pick that up as well, because I think we could talk about that more, but I really appreciate that answer, Councilmember. And, you know, to your point about the barriers to accessing something like an internship, when you surveyed CUNY students themselves, you know, CUNY students say the #1 reason they don't participate in an internship is they just don't have the time. And I think that obviously in many cases is code for money, but 61% of students said, I didn't participate in an internship in all 4 years because I didn't have the time. So getting at some of the supports that might be needed to offset some of these other costs. And I'll say the Center for Urban Futures has written about those challenges and opportunities extensively, the opportunity costs of attending college, the need for support for the non-tuition costs of college. But getting back to some of the other issues, you know, related to expanding access to these pathways into tech, you know, Abby, I wanted to bring you in again about thinking about government's role in all of this. And, you know, whether it's around scaling up access to these sorts of career connected learning opportunities, work-based learning opportunities, not just junior, senior year of college, but earlier in college and earlier in their journey toward potentially a college degree. Thinking about some of these specific programs that we've talked about, whether it's the $20 million investment that got 2X Tech off the ground, but now is up as of this year, or much smaller programs like Cuny Tech Prep. I know there's a lot of competing priorities here, so I'd love your help kind of thinking through where should government focus to have the greatest impact? In some cases, that might be helping to spur more from the private sector or partnering more effectively with philanthropy. But what would you like to see government even just thinking about in the next phase of investment in expanding access to tech careers? And how does CUNY fit into that thinking?
So that's a lot to answer. So appreciate that. So I think there's several roles government can play. One is we have the ability to bring people together to actually do what I said before and really think about what are the shared goals. How do we make sure there's commitment to those goals? How do we align resources and incentives? And how do we make sure that we have the formal structures in place? And really lifting up what's working and figuring out how do you scale that? And what are the barriers to scale? So we often point to resources as the barriers to scale, and that certainly is one of them, but it's not the only one. There's oftentimes institutional policy that is barrier to scale. So really thinking through that, what that is. And then it's also, what are we doing now that we've always been doing, and we just do because we've always been doing it, but in fact, that's what's getting in the way. And I think we've been seeing that a little bit in the conversations we've been having with New York City public schools, K through 12, really thinking about what does it take to put career success as a priority of students. We're seeing that in the conversations with CUNY and what CUNY's been looking at. What happens when we shift the goal to not being just degree completion, but really thinking through career success and wage and earning power of students. What does that look like on the ground, and what does that mean that we have to move away from? And I think that's something that government can really help with. I think many of you've heard me say this before. What we're talking about here is not marginal shifts if we want to get the change. I think many of us in the room know the research that given where today's economy is, most jobs, certainly those that are fulfilling economically secure jobs, require an employer valued post-secondary credential. And not just most, I think the number is 85% or higher. And in this city, it's probably higher because we're competing with talent from all over the world. And so if that's the case, and we look at how many of our, let's say, 9th graders, by the time they're 25 are getting that, maybe it's 25%. Maybe it's more like less than that. And so, but what we want to get to is 100%. So that doesn't mean just we need to increase graduation rates at the high school level or at the post-secondary level, although we've done a remarkable job of that. And I think that's a hats off to our educators in the room. But it's not just that, it's this experience question. And that's where I think we need to underscore that government can play a role in terms of resources and alignment, but it won't be just government, it won't be just CUNY, and it won't be just employers. Because in order to do this, we have to do it together, because there's no way to do it apart. You can't get people into good jobs unless employers are very much at the table, helping to design those systems and structures to make it happen. We can't do it at scale if we leave CUNY out of the picture. They serve too many people and it's too great a resource. And we can't do it unless government prioritizes it as our economic development strategy. This talent is our biggest asset. We have to invest in it. And we have to invest in it not just sort of over there as workforce programs, but in our central institutions. So as we're thinking about our, the Economic Development Corporation investments, as we're thinking about our own hiring processes, as we're thinking about our investments in CUNY and DOE, and really keep asking that question, how do we make sure New Yorkers are well positioned for good jobs? How do we make sure employers have the talent and the local talent they need to thrive? Because that's really what the public good is about. And that's sort of the role of the city.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Jason.
Oh, sorry. And maybe what I would add too is that, over the last year, the state has allocated $150 million to workforce development. right? So how do we make sure that the lion's share, at least a meaningful share, is going to, CUNY students, right? I mean, one of the things that, that CUF and Tech NYC did is, we worked on this report showing how tech has been the #1 driver for new jobs here in New York. And I'm sure it was mentioned before, but, over 114,000 jobs have been created over the last 12 years. New jobs, new family sustaining jobs that, allow folks to be able to build wealth, to be able to have a career and to be able to grow, right? So if we can do more to ensure that on the government side, we're allocating the resources there, if we could do more to ensure that we're also investing more in the tech sector, so that we can continue to see more of those jobs created. Like, I would love to see that when we come back for this panel 10 years from now, we have another 114,000 jobs that are created. There we go, or 5, right? But when we come back,
Or actually, there's no need for the panel.
or there's
in
no,
10
well,
years.
that's right, that's right.
It's a party, it's a celebration.
It's another sector that we have to.
Exactly. We're dealing with, we're figuring out solutions to other challenges. But the large majority of those jobs, we should have an eye toward making sure that they are built toward making sure that they're being filled by CUNY students. Because I'll tell you, the dirty secret about all of this, as we think about where New York's tech sector has to be, is it has to be something that's inclusive. It has to be something that's made from folks, who went to school here in New York. It has to be something that's reflective of the values of New York if we wanted to be able to achieve its potential and be able to get to that next 114,000. So that means that everyone here has a concerted effort in making sure all the students that come through our CUNY institutions have an opportunity to be able to thrive. And I think also a part of that is making sure that government and the private sector as well is doing everything we can to make sure that the schools, that the teachers, that the infrastructure has the money and the resources to be able to do well. Like, I know Google has done a lot of terrific things. I think they just allocated another $1 million to make sure that there's more digital literacy for teachers so that they can be able to teach and provide the education that we need in these areas. So when we talk about government, we have to figure out ways that some of the funding that's already allocated is going into those spaces, and that we're also doing it in a way that we're building the pipeline and we're building the job opportunities as you all are growing into these roles.
So, can I just say, go ahead. I just wanted to say, it's also, we really have to sort of work together. Google has their own program, Amazon has their own program, all these tech on our tech company side, we really have to be also a little bit, or try to be a little bit more united as well. CUNY has their own work to do on being united in that sense, but because that's most helpful. And it makes it difficult for someone like Lindsey, who's then doing the work. It's just extra work when it's not made as easy for her by having to go out individually to each person. I mean, that was one of the reasons why CUNY Tech Meetup, I sort of felt like, here's an evening once a month. Just come anyone. I don't care if you can, spell technology, just come if you're at all interested. Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
And so, you mentioned that, working with the private industry again, that, and I'm really glad you brought up 9th grade, things like that. So there are a few things I think government does. One is, one of the hearings that I had recognized that there are things outside the classroom. It was about the CUNY single stop successor programs, which is, essentially there are needs students have outside of the classroom, like food, healthcare, and housing. And these programs are supposed to help students connect with what they need. And part of the success of that program hinges on whether students know that this exists. And I think that's one of the jobs of CUNY, is to make sure students know that CUNY is a place not just for your education, but for the whole student. When it comes to speaking with the private industry and that continuum, what I've noticed through teaching high school is it all boils down to assessment. And this could be said of CUNY as well. If I'm a high school teacher, well, I was a high school teacher, we're given a test And I am judged on how well my students do on the test. And the student is judged on how well they do on the test. The school is judged on how well they do the test. And the system is judged on how well they do the test. They're going to teach the tests. And there's nothing wrong with, having standards. You need standards and you need kind of guidelines of what to teach. But if the tech sector is saying, we really are getting students who do not know how to analyze data, which is a huge thing in the tech sector. And in our high school curriculum, we spend about a week or 2 weeks freshman year because there's not a ton of questions on the Regents exam about data and statistics. Teachers aren't going to spend a lot of time teaching it, and students aren't going to spend a lot of time learning it. So as a government, we have a responsibility to be a little more flexible and to meet the needs of our students and meet the needs of the tech sector, who's saying this is what we need. CUNY has, I think, a little more flexibility, and the professors have a little more flexibility. But again, if we're looking at, which school, if we're assessing schools, let's say on who has the most career counselors, and we're using that as a metric, the schools will invest more money and more time in career counselors. If schools are judged, and it's very public on how many students they place in paid internships, then rest assured, the schools will be working harder to place more students in paid internships. But there is, of course, working with the private, the tech sector, the big private companies themselves. And as a government, we're very big and influential. And I would say we as a government have a responsibility to work with the tech sector and say, look, if you could invest tens of billions of dollars in research and development, tens of billions of dollars in that, you can invest like tens of thousands in people, in making sure there's a pool of applicants for your own company, but with these paid internships, so that you can have a wide pool of applicants with, and again, we talk about diversity, and I want to expand that it's not just ethnic diversity, but it's diversity of experiences, and again, really valuing those experiences that I spoke about earlier, and the experiences that CUNY students are more likely to have than perhaps Columbia students, which it's okay to have experience of Columbia students, but it's let's expand it a little more.
Thanks, Councilmember. Let's go to the Chancellor, then Abby, and then over to Lindsey as well.
So just quickly, one thing, clearly we need additional resources, city and state. Part of my role is to go make that case in those spaces. And luckily, I think that we have an alignment of both in Albany and both in the city of leadership that's supportive to the work that we do and have been beginning to invest more in this space of careers, paid internships, all those things, right? So more there. On the private philanthropy also, today we announced this upskilling initiative, which is a way to respond, to be more quickly, more nimble, so students can take things not necessarily in classes, people outside courses, and that's money from the State Department of Labor, JP Morgan Chase, and Bank of New York Mellon, right? So a great way to combine, 7,000 probably students can benefit from that, 50 new courses, is using also our continuing ed space, which is a lot more flexible as a way to get some people in, right? So we're being nimble that way. The other part is we need additional resources, but we also need to be more efficient and better with some of the things that we already have. And I'll give you one example. We have two, what they call opportunity programs, SEEK and College Discovery, right? That actually have pretty great metrics and track records of getting students that they get a little more flexibility to come in with the admissions criteria, but they come from low socioeconomic status. That's what you need to be able to have to participate, right? So we have good data about those two programs. I was looking at them, and many of the students there are students of color, and STEM majors were not really that well represented, right? So one of the things, I had a conversation with our new professor, said, why don't we also take these two programs that already exist, that have an infrastructure of counseling and support, right? What do we need to do there, right? To encourage most of the students that come there to seek, majors and things, in STEM and tech, right? That is not going to require probably a lot of additional resources from our end. It's going to be a way to reallocate things we already have, right? So I think on our end, clearly the resources are needed, but also I've committed to using the ones that we do have in a much more efficient way, with programs that have a good track record like those two, that address some of the students that we're talking about that we want to bring into the sector. And maybe we could do a lot more there with something already exist.
Thanks, Chancellor. I'll just add to the underrepresented populations you're mentioning, also
Yep.
women at CUNY. You know, I mean, I think women are about 55%.
Well, I mean, yeah, and in
58%
SEEK, and yep, and
of the student body as a whole, but only about 19% of computer science majors. And that's an area obviously where it doesn't start in the last 2 years of college, but I think those programs you're mentioning and others, Breakthrough Tech and others, can really help to help more students see that
and
pathway.
think about just one thing, because I saw our colleagues from the Queens College Tech Incubator that's something that got started when I was president there, and it gets funded through the city council. But that was a space, for example, I mean, is an economic development tool, right, for the borough. But that space works so well with the students, right, in filling out some of the gaps. I remember when some of the initial funding for CUNY 2X came, the students came back from the first set of interviews and said, they're asking us about all these work-based projects that we don't get to do until you're a junior and senior in class, right? And so through the incubator, through their clubs, they started sharing information to get ready for the interviews, right? They were going to talk to the faculty, and the curriculum did get all that, but that was going to take time, right? So there's also all these other spaces that, if they're supported, they're great ways to get the students what they need to be able to be ready to be competitive in a job interview for a real job or an internship.
You know, Chancellor, I want to go to Abby and Lindsay as well, but let me just ask you one more question. I'll take the moderator's prerogative if you don't mind, because you mentioned it earlier, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it back up, and that's faculty in all of this.
Yes.
You know, one of the challenges we heard about is simply the course loads, and related to that faculty play such a key role in helping provide career services. It's not just the career services departments, it's faculty making connections in industry, bringing that to their students. There's some challenges there around being able to still learn from industry for folks that have not been in industry for a while, but there's also challenges around just the sheer numbers. You know, we learned, for instance, that Hunter College, and this really is an amazing stat, but has gone from 85 computer science majors 12 years ago to more than 1,600 today. You know, Queens College went from 406 to over 3,500. But at the same time, faculty, tenure track faculty just hasn't kept pace with that. And over the past 3 years, in part because of the hiring freeze, which is obviously outside of your control, that full-time faculty at CUNY have declined about 5.5%. And there's also retirements on the horizon. So briefly, if you don't mind me asking you this, but what support, if any, is needed specifically around computer science or other technical tech fields to be able to have the faculty that you need to meet the demand from students?
So absolutely crucial. And I mean, again, we're fortunate that in the budget at the state level this year, the governor sort of allocated for about 500 new faculty lines. We cheated, and we began the hiring process for 250 earlier, right? Because the budget people do that. They say, we're going to give it to you. It takes a year to hire. And that year, right, they don't need to put the money. So we knew that we got a good chance. So we jump-started, and we brought in about 250 new full-time faculty members that are beginning this year. And about 25% of those are related to tech related fields, right? So we allow the campuses to sort of do some priority areas. They put tech as one. So there's going to be a second, right, installment of the other group, which will come next year. So in that injection of new faculty, which was badly needed, tech has been well represented, at least in this first batch. So I think there's movement in the right direction. The second part is engaging the faculty that you have, which they all really are invested in helping their students succeed and find the right match. The thing is that, and it's maybe different in some of the more tech-specific areas, but you are hired to do something else. It's not something that you're told is part of your responsibility. So we've been working 2 projects, and Lauren put a Career Fellows program, and then also through our work with the CEO Jobs Council, funding from the Judy Diamond Foundation, went also to fund faculty fellows. And these are going to be sort of your champions about, working in this space, what translates, what becomes important, and they become then voices in their own departments about the importance of this work. And I think we found a very good response from faculty that want to do that. When the CUNY TX came as a president then, I argue a lot. I didn't get it from the city back then, that our faculty should be given release time to be able to go be an industry, like a mini sabbatical, right? To brush up on skills, see what's recent, and then also build the same networks that we're talking about the students, right? Which then they know people that can come to their class, they can come to recruit, right? So that's another thing which I think we could do that could really benefit the faculty and therefore the students.
Terrific, Chancellor. Thank you. Yeah, Abby, please.
Thank you. So I want to add ASAP to that those programs to look at.
Yeah.
But Eric, I'm so glad you brought up assessments because I think that sort of represents incentives. And I think we need to look at institutional assessments as well as student or faculty or teacher assessments, but really looking at the assessments closely and seeing how well they're aligned to the goals we have. And I bring up a story because it's assessments also at companies. So we all know the research shows that companies are more likely to be successful if they have a more diverse workforce and diversity when it comes to lived experience. That's well documented research, and it's true for tech companies just like other companies. But yet we don't have the assessments of the hiring managers or HR or hiring processes that align with that goal. And so it reminds me of, I was talking to an employer who works closely with a great organization that works closely with Cuny Braven. They work with Lehman and now will be working at City College to really help support. And their model has it where people, fellows from corporates, from the companies teach at the schools under the guidance of a faculty member. So the HR person at this company actually uses whether or not one of the employees is a Braven Fellow as a sign about whether or not they're an up and coming leader and should be well positioned for promotion or not. So therefore, that if you look at that and you're an aspiring young hire at a company, you very much like, this is a way I can give back, give to the community, but it also really helps me professionally figure out what I want to do. And that assessment is so important to the change that we're going to see, because in order to get to these paid internships, paid apprenticeships, you actually, and hiring, you actually need the placements. Like we can have enough funds, but we might not have enough placements because, as we all know, who've hired interns and apprentices and new staff, it takes investment in the hiring supervisors to manage those folks and to make sure they have the support to be successful. So I, as a company, I'm not going to do that unless I know that there will be something in place to do it, and that the larger company will have my back in supporting that. So again, assessments and incentives, and it's not just about what's happening in the education sector, whether it's at the high school or at the CUNY, but very much at the employer level too.
Thanks, Abby. Lindsay, I wanted to give you a last word for this part of the panel, and then I do want to turn it over to our audience as well. So why don't you go ahead, and then we'll take some questions as well.
Okay, great. There's been so much good stuff that's been discussed, and there's just 2 points that I'm hoping to make. One is just to come back to Hashir's comment about what CUNY students bring to a professional opportunity and how rich that is and how undervalued that is based on the resume. So I think there's something that I have heard frequently from corporate partners and those who work in the tech sector, that there's like 2 worlds internally that are often not in communication with each other within a company. One is the like CSR, corporate social responsibility, workforce development, give back stuff. And the other is HR and just hiring. So like for us as the tech sector, how do we harmonize there so that hiring is the goal of any workforce development program, if that's the investment that you're looking to start with, and ultimately get those HR folks on board so that the internships leading to part-time, leading to full-time, whatever that pathway is an open opportunity. So that's one, and just want to thank you again for raising that up. The other is, I think I'm hearing it from you, Chancellor, and Abby Jo, you had some great points here on career pathways, but I feel like There is a way that we could envision a like big vision for the future of CUNY this is, as has been said, as has been like ranked and all of that, this is your place for economic mobility. But the only way economic mobility comes into play is through that job, right? So getting into college is like absolutely step one, but CUNY having the resources to enable their students to then launch that career that creates that economic mobility for their family, be the whole point. And if that's the whole point of CUNY, this fits within tech, but it also fits every other sector in New York City. If that's the whole point, then you have paid internships absolutely from like freshman year, right? The first time you get on campus, start learning about opportunities for paid internships.
In high school too.
Coming from high school too, sure. But what else can faculty be doing? What else can a much more robust career services office do to ensure that the students are creating a portfolio of, code that they've worked on? So even if they didn't get the internship, they can walk into an interview. It sounds like this might be what you did. We walk into the interview to say, I have this experience. I've worked with real code and real data. I can do this at your company. How does that get integrated into their experience on campus? How does learning how to proceed in a mock or practice with a mock technical interview become part of your computer science degree? So finding all of those opportunities, to your point on metrics, so that at the end of the student's experience, everybody is aligned that our goal here is to get these students into great professional opportunities.
Yep.
Thanks, Lindsay. Well, on that note, maybe folks could join me in a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much. Don't go anywhere. We want to turn it over to our audience briefly for a few questions. We are going to share some microphones. So Don and Hashir, if you don't mind sharing with your neighbors, so Lindsay and Hashir and Jason and Don, just because of the limitations of the microphones in the room, we certainly want to hear from all of you. And for folks in the audience, please raise your hands if you have questions, comments. Wait for the microphone to come to you. Please let us know your name, any organization you may be with, and please keep your questions short, because I think a lot of folks in the room, I can already see the hands going up, have things to share. So hold your hands up. We'll start the front right. And let me see on the other side of the room, all the way in the back, last row in the back, and then we'll go from there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. I'm Robin Garrell. I'm the president of the Graduate Center, and welcome to our building today. As you're all speaking, I'm wondering, what can each of us do to broaden roads for students into these amazing careers? And I think my answer comes from a place that we have already established works well, and that's holistic admissions. To the employers, what are you doing? I think several points were raised to think about the applicant not just as notches in a belt or badges on a sash, but that whole person, the skills that every employer says they want: resilience, perseverance, time management, all those things are life experiences. So many of you are employers. Think about what that means in your organization to connect the dots between social responsibility and human resources. But for those of us who are in education at any level, working with students, how are we guiding our students to tell their stories, not just as notches in a belt, but as their lived experience? How do they reflect on how they combined caring for a child or a brother, or working 2 jobs, or being homeless? What did they take away, and what do they bring to the experience as an employee? Grit, resilience, talent, knowledge. Each of us has something that we can do to make this project work. So thanks for thinking about that.
Thank you. And so I see a hand on the right there, but we're going to start in the back. I think someone already has a microphone, and then we'll come up to the front. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Louisa Tatum. I am the manager of the Career Services Department at the New York Public Library. One thing that I noticed just in this conversation is we're talking about this from kind of a macro perspective, like really big. And my job is to work individually with my staff members who are doing career coaching, resume writing for free for all of New York City residents. And we're not talking about the individual, right? And how career services, HR departments really, and learning and development at all levels can really support the individual. And kind of what I mean by that, from an employer's perspective, if they want to hire, they're looking for someone who meets the criteria on a job description. And maybe they wow you in the interview, right? So why can't it be, or this is kind of a suggestion and a question, how are employers challenging CUNY and other institutions to say, writing a job description, here is exactly what I am looking for from the thousands of applicants that we have had, or the thousands of employees that we have had. Here's kind of a running list of all the things that we're looking for in the diverse race in a very detailed manner, right? So it's not just the classes you took, but it's the, the understanding of how to advance, in your career, salary negotiation, all of that stuff that's important. And then from another perspective, from the education side, what are the educators doing to challenge employers to say, hey, you are not focusing on a key sector of, that we have, a key, diverse talent that we have. There's more diversity in CUNY than there is in the tech sector. We know that. There's also, and so really specifically to say, if you want to focus on single moms, why not, from a CUNY education perspective, why don't we create something for single moms to make sure that they succeed in the tech sector? You can do that specifically because you're in education, whereas an employer might not be able to do that. So how is the education side challenging the employer to say you need to hire more people that are in these communities, maybe take on a housing project community, and we need to get, people and look at them and make sure that they're prepared? And how do we help individuals create their vision, then create a strategy, and then execute a plan from the education side? So it's how is both challenging each other is my question.
Well, let me, I'll quickly talk on one of the things that we have prioritized is this engagement with the employers, particularly to be able to get from the HR side a clear roadmap of what they're looking for, right? And for example, that is a basic premise of the work that we've done with the New York City Jobs CEO Council and the micro-credential programs that have been launched initially. Some of the applied associate's degree that have apprenticeship component to them that are being launched with that deep feedback from the HR departments in the companies that are part of the council. We have another initiative which is in finance, and we are sort of trying to learn from that. Is Futures in Finance, began with Centerbridge. It expanded to have Bloomberg and Goldman Sachs and others as part of that. And that's another niche sector that we're hoping to learn what we can learn there that can be applied to other sectors, techs and others. So, but again, it's getting that direct feedback from HR, from the programs, when you place the students, what worked, what didn't work, and then be able to share that with career services back on the campuses, to share that with the faculty in the departments that they're creating the program, so curriculum can be upgraded. And in that conversation with faculty, it's interesting, it's like work in translation. Anybody you go to and say you're doing things wrong, your initial reaction is not gonna be to embrace you, right? But for example, in the case of faculty, they have learning outcomes that they have. Every class has learning outcomes because of accreditation. There's language there that connects very much with the critical skills that employers need. So we're using faculty to start talking about, this is something you already do. It might just take a different way of, an exercise in the class. It might be that you do some preparation for interviews that can be part of an exercise that meets these learning outcomes for the class you're already teaching, right? So it takes some work, but when they look at it that way, we have found faculty to be incredibly, actually pleased that we're giving them a very concrete tool for them to do something that they know will help their students get a job.
Yeah. Oh, and what I would also add to that is, and it's something I've been thinking about just, throughout this panel and over these, frankly, these last couple of months as well, is that, at Tech NYC, we have over 800 tech companies, right? And as I said before, there are over 10,000 job opportunities that are available right now. So how do we figure out a way to proactively develop a plan, right? Saying that these are the different sectors that we're seeing the most growth in. These are the job opportunities, or these are the skills that we need them to be able to have. And how do we almost, as just, a checklist is kind of too reductivist, but how do we figure out a way, I think, as you were saying, is saying these are all the things that we need here. And if you can be able to help us with being able to identify the students that can be able to bring this to the table, then we will do our job in making sure that we're doing everything we can to connect you with folks who are looking for some of those roles. And the second thing I think about as part of that, and it's a little, it's a little tougher, but I think there's some real value there, is that there are over 25,000 startups in New York, right? And a lot of them are doing very interesting things that are responsive to the needs of all New Yorkers, in all of these areas where I think those lived experiences will have extra value. So how do we figure out a way to be able to partner or trying to connect students who have those unique skills and unique life experiences in addition to the technical skills that would make them have impact? And I think that's maybe something that we should probably have a larger conversation with, following this panel.
Can I add a third point here? I'm very curious for those 10,000 plus jobs, what the hiring process is, and really looking at whether there's some systemic barriers in those hiring processes that could be overcome by partnership with Cuny and really rethinking how those are done.
Yeah.
And therefore getting that broader base of talent that will be so critical to the long-term success of those companies.
Right. Yeah. And I'll
Can
just
I-
say to that, oh, sure. Go for it.
Well, I mean, it comes back to the system is designed exactly for itself, right? Like for the outcomes we see. So I think that there is truth to a long history of incredible bias in the recruiting and hiring process. And there's some like newer conversations and newer technologies and tools to help companies be more objective, be more clear about what they need out of the position that removes some of that subjective bias, and create a much more universal approach to how both you are vetting candidates, asking them questions, bringing them in for interviews, challenging with their tasks. So I think there are tools that are coming up that that hopefully will help us to change that system so that the opportunity actually is not a closed door.
Right, thank you all. Let me take another question. Someone has the microphone on the left, then we're heading to the fourth row, and then to the front center. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark, CUNY alum, 95, 96. I will speak for the silent majority of those of us who had to leave school because of personal responsibilities and come back after a long absence, and some who have never even returned as of yet. To me, the red herring is the federal work-study program. I had to have the confidence in knowing when I'm stuck on the IRT train, taking my kid to daycare, that I was going to get credit for going to work, and it was directly tied into my financial aid. It would not be affected. The federal work student aid program, it's still to me in my process is the best thing that's out there that CUNY needs to get the tech industry involved in. Fun fact, you do not need a 4-year degree to know how to write code. Zuckerberg didn't need it, Bill Gates didn't need it, but I can work collaboratively with young people as I'm a little older. You give me credit for earning my degree in computer science, so I can work collaborative efforts with younger people as they're earning their degree. Federal work federal work study program. Yeah, it helped me get through. It can still be effective, but I don't see anyone talking about it. You talk about internships, apprenticeships, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs. There are tech jobs all over. NYCHA has tech jobs. The local city council person's office has tech jobs. There are tech jobs where I live in Brownsville, East New York, Brooklyn. There are tech jobs all over. We have to incentivize people to go back to school to reboot our skills so we can go back and do the work we need to do.
Great, thank you for the
We-
So actually,
We use, so Lauren, so you can ask Lauren because we did a pilot precisely using that point that you made about using the federal work study in a way that was much more directed and targeted to help students. So music to our ears, and you can ask her how it went.
and I would, Mark, you said? Yeah, so, you know, it's very, and I don't, the chancellor's a very challenging job because he has to do, you know, it's a state, the CUNY's like state run, but also like we fund things for the city and have city initiatives, and there's federal things he has to deal with. So, you know, kudos to you. Not jealous. One of the things that we funded in the city was Cuny Reconnect. This was an initiative we got, I think, $4.1 or $4.2 million for people who have some credits at Cuny, and then for whatever reason did not finish their degree. And so this program is designed to bring them back into CUNY so they can finish getting their degrees. But I also don't want to, was it Louisa in the back? Yeah. I just want to say very quickly, a lot of it goes back to assessments and, you know, success criteria, as non-educators may call it. And if our private companies are saying, look, here's what we're looking for in a resume, here is specifically what you want to do, what we want you to do in a job, making those assessments clear would certainly help the work you do and the work any of us and our students do. And I would add one more thing, to recognize that our faculty, and the chancellor kind of alluded to this, but they're hired as educators, and you use the word educator, but also recognizing that those educators, the faculty, the professors are also, in a sense, social workers. They are job placement coordinators. They do all of these other tasks, and I wouldn't want to, you know, continue on without recognizing the incredible work that our educators do.
So Jonathan doesn't have to do the shameless plug. The Cuny Reconnect is an idea that the speaker took from a report from the Center for, you know, the Urban Futures about a program that was very successful in Tennessee. So kudos to you for your work, for highlighting that, and the speaker and the council for making it work. So you didn't have to say it, I did it for you.
And CUNY has also been really looking at credit for prior learning, which is absolutely critical because experience is so important, and not just looking at credit for prior learning, but credit for concurrent learning. So the more that CUNY is able to do that, the more people who can come back and get their degrees, as well as finish their degrees if they're already in.
Thank you all. So we have a question here in the fourth row, and then we're going to go to the center and we'll continue on if we have time. Thank you.
Good morning. Jorge Silva, I'm the Dean of the School of Professional Studies at CUNY. Very specific question on something the Chancellor mentioned earlier, micro-credentials, particularly stackable micro-credentials. So I'm going to take it in a slightly different way. We at SPS have very successful bachelor's and master's in information systems and data science. Our issue is not placement. We cannot produce enough graduates of the master's degree in terms of the demand. So that's not our issue. Our issue is that, as you probably know, academia moves at a certain pace. So for us to develop a new program, academic program, and go through governance takes a bit of time. By the time we complete that program, maybe some of the content might have been started to get a bit obsolete. So that's a challenge for us. How are we dealing with that? By developing stackable micro-credentials to develop the digital and tech skills for our students. But my question is to you, particularly the employers, what value do you give to those micro-credentials? And if there's a system by which we can vet what's a truly valuable micro-credential versus another, because that way we can insert that into the current curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
What do you mean by micro-credentials? You mean like specific technology, know-how or solutions, or what exactly do you mean?
Let me give you just one example. We're developing a micro-credential on data analytics. Yeah. The concept being every student who graduates from SPS, actually every student who graduates from CUNY, should have some fundamental knowledge of data analytics and data visualization. So we produce that micro-credential and we insert it as a module in a course versus developing a full course on that necessarily, which we also do. But in this case, the micro-credential can apply to a much vaster amount of students.
Yeah, so I would like to chime in on that. So someone who has at Amazon done interviews with people from CUNY who have had these types of credentials, right? They have been to a boot camp, or they have done online courses where it's focused, right? So in my field of study is more called a focus, if you're focused inside of a field, right? So those are definitely something we would take a look at if that is what the role has in its requirements, right? If your role says, hey, you have to have these skills or else you cannot be called this title, I kind of have to look at that as a person who's doing the interview, right? I'm going to assess your skills. But one main thing that I think every interviewer in the current age has is, do they still have those basic skills to solve a problem in the tech sector, right? Those things are never going to change, right? So yeah, in the field of tech, every year it changes, right? Every year a new field comes out inside of, let's say, machine learning, AI, right, and data science. New fields are always coming out, but the main thing that we're still looking for are those core values in problem solving, but also one thing that you can do as educators is having more guest lecturers, right? So people that are already in the field, such as myself, right, who are working at this and who have the time and the actual motivation to learn these new topics, because we have to apply them in our job. We can come in and start teaching these skills to everyone in your college, right? And that way it doesn't really enforce you to change your courses. It doesn't force you to change the curriculum. And this is more of an extra that you can add on top of those courses. And if students are interested, I don't know if everyone would do this, but me as a lecturer, right, I would have resources where if they want to learn more, they can online. There's free courses online, right? There's lots of avenues. So to kind of cut that short, yes, it's looked at, but only really if it's a specific role that they're applying for. For most people, if they're going for let's say a SDE role, right, or just an architect, those roles really will require core problem solving skills.
Great. So we have the next question is, yeah, right in the front center. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Deborah Albert. I'm building a company called Learn with Deborah. First, I want to thank you all and applaud you for the work that you're doing, because it's hugely important. And I would like very much to take 2 seconds to ask the audience, how many people here, just by show of hands, have experienced themselves or who know someone like a parent who's experienced ageism in the workplace? Show of hands. Okay, I'm not a statistician, but that's a healthy number, no? What I'm curious about, we keep talking about diversity, we keep talking about inclusion. There's data to show that ageism in the workplace starts at 40, and more recent data to show that ageism starts in certain industries at 36. Now imagine you're living longer, healthier lives, and you're 40, 50, 60, and you can't get work. This is a huge societal problem that has enormous tentacles in terms of the issues that it affects. So I'm curious what, if anything, is being done to bring these people who are not so digitally savvy into the learning situations so that they can learn and be more competitive for the future of work and get or stay employed.
There's programs like Perscolis. Yeah. There's programs here in New York like Perscolis, that works with adults to prepare them for technology careers. I'm not sure.
So I could just say very briefly, in the city council, so we have local senior centers, and we're funding them, and they do a lot of that workforce development work, or at least the introduction to ensuring older adults remain in the workplace, because as you mentioned, the needs in the workforce are changing, but older adults may have left their career or want to come back to a career or don't have those hard skills. that they need. I think we've sort of, Hashir, you mentioned this sort of briefly, but I think it's also important for the employers to recognize the soft skills that are really important for companies to recognize. So yes, you have a micro credential in HTML, I guess, is the only coding thing. Like I took an HTML class in high school. Cool. Totally
Python,
obsolete.
Python, it was at that
Oh,
one.
Python, C++. Is MS-DOS a thing? I don't know.
No.
But am I able to collaborate, with others? And I think, I would hope, especially during the pandemic, we would recognize how vital those soft skills are and how vital it is. Things like social emotional learning, things that we are still not assessing, mental health education, and yes, working collaboratively, because there was no one who was working on this, anything dealing with the pandemic, who was just sitting in a cubicle all alone saying, man, gosh, if only I knew Python, then we could solve this whole problem. It was all about a lot about the soft skills. So I think our, providing the opportunities for older adults at CUNY to come back, and I know those opportunities exist to get those back those hard skills. We have those opportunities that we're funding in the city council for our senior centers, but also the responsibility again of the private institutions to value and recognize the experiences, as you mentioned, Deborah, the experiences and the soft skills that are required and valuable in their industry.
And I want to thank you for raising. I think this sort of speaks to a mind shift that really needs to happen much more holistically. And we have sort of this mindset where you go to school for the first 20 to 25 years of your life, and then you go to work for the next 50, if you're lucky, 30 years of your life. And that's not really reflective of most people's lived experience or the labor market, or particularly the labor market now, which is rapidly changing. And so that's where really shifting from that linear model to a more braided model where you're working and learning, beginning, in high school and have it lifelong, and then making sure our educational institutions and our employers are set up for that braided learning model. And that's a case where you can't do that without CUNY. And that's why the work that CUNY's doing on having people come back and really figuring out how are you that lifelong partner to New Yorkers to make sure we're all learning the skills that we need to be successful. It's going to be critical. And I think will help your enrollments too.
Well, but I mean, a couple of thoughts. The gentleman, Dean Silva Puras, the School of Professional Studies, it was created to serve adult learners initially, right? So you have a kindred spirit in the Dean and the School of Professional Studies. And I want to give a shout out. We have two of our other CUNY presidents who were there. Ken Adams from LaGuardia was there for a while, and Larry Johnson from government. So we have a very committed core in the leadership in the system around this issue of career and tech. But the announcement we made today about the upskilling, that is open to all New Yorkers, not just CUNY students. So we are, we're trying to knock on the doors of anybody who wants to be able and update their skills, venture into new terrain, and see where that journey leads, right? And that can lead to a job, to a promotion. It can lead to wanting to come back to school, full-time or part-time, right? But we're very open to that. And that upskilling space is precisely to sort of cast that wider net to address some of the issues that you identify.
All right, I know we have a lot more questions. I really apologize, but we told our panelists and our audience 10:45 was when we were going to wrap it up. So unfortunately, we're going to have to cut it off there. If anybody wants to come up and speak to folks that are able to stay, you can do so individually afterwards. Again, I'm Jonathan Bowles with the Center for an Urban Future, and I wanted to close today first with a quick point and kind of following up the last question, but that also connects back to CUNY because back in December, we published a blueprint with 10 specific ideas for how to help New York City's small businesses. And we heard in that research, there are actually a lot of older small business owners in New York that aren't so digital savvy and actually could really benefit from getting some of the digital tools so they could get into e-commerce or do some of the other things to stay competitive. And one of the really best, interesting ideas we had for that, solving that problem, came from Baruch President David Wu, who suggested, let's tap CUNY's student body. younger, digital savvy students to kind of help our small businesses in New York City, and especially those older small business owners, to get that kind of digital savviness. So that's a really interesting idea. But I also wanted to, and before I thank everybody, I had one more question. I don't usually do this at our panels, but I really would, I wanted to actually put one person on the spot, and that would be Hashir. I really enjoyed the last suggestion you had in terms of the guest lecturer and bringing folks into from the tech sector. But I wanted to give you one more opportunity. Just if you had one suggestion, either for CUNY or for tech companies, I'd just love to hear what it would be.
So one thing that I would say over anything, right, is the conversations we've been having today have been about CUNY as a pipeline. The input are people from communities, and then the output are workers, right? Talent into that pipeline. But it can also be looked at reverse, where you already have a pool of employees and tech workers, and also it's the same point as having the guest lecturers, right? That is an entire untapped pipeline of talent that you can bring into education, and that is not being done enough. Right, that is if you ask any student in CUNY, they will tell you that we want people who know the current stuff in tech to come and teach and also build their network, right? Because these people are currently working there. They should have the opportunity to come and mentor, have apprentices, and just come in and share their knowledge, right? And what they have learned in the recent years, right? And that is just not happening enough, right? I try to find people to mentor. I have to do so much work to try to find someone. I have to connect with my contacts from 3-4 years ago in CUNY to try to get someone that I can help, right, in CUNY, to try to mentor them or do anything. And I feel like that is such a huge pipeline that is just untapped.
Fantastic, love it. Well, with that, I want to thank, can you all join me in thanking our wonderful panel? I want to thank you all. I want to especially thank Councilmember Dinowitz for taking your time to be here and for those thoughtful comments. And thank Abby Jo for being here. Best wishes for all that you're doing in City Hall. Chancellor, I know how much you're doing at CUNY and the progress that you've been making. Very excited about the upskilling announcement. Very excited about the Reconnect CUNY, and thank you for those words. And thank you to all of you for being here today. I really appreciate it, and all that you're doing for our city. So thank you. Thanks to everybody here, and another big thanks to Amazon. Without them, this would not be possible. And let me say also that thanks to their support, we are also coming out with a major new report that's all focused on how we as a city can more fully harness CUNY as a launch pad into tech careers. That will be out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're excited to share that with you, and we will. Until then, let us know if you have any ideas for us at the Center for an Urban Future. Thanks for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.
Great. I really appreciate it. Awesome. Thank you.